water meters, relationships, and breath. Thomas was agitated as he rushed up Rathdown Road. He didn't like the rush, but he wanted to be at the North Circular Road entrance to Rathdown before the water meter lorries arrived. If he could just keep the lorries on the main road, the day would be easier. Some drivers forced to stop would try to bump the lorry inch by inch into the side street, but if he stood firm, they would cause a traffic jam, and eventually pressure from the other traffic would force him to move on. He had a pain in his chest as he rushed up the hill. A lifetime nicotine smoker, he was well aware that he was running in the overtime of his life game. There was no way of knowing how much overtime you got. And rushing up the Rathdown Road, he wondered if the final whistle might not be blown at any second. He had an image of himself collapsing, gasping for breath, just as he got in front of the Sierra workmen. How pathetic would that be? And really, if it was going to be the last scene in his personal life story, is this where he wanted it to be played out? The corner of Rathdown on the North Circular Road? A Caribbean island might have been preferable. But nah, that was just a lot of advertisement. In reality, he could have helped at the Grange Garment Squad Garden. Acts of resistance against corporate domination didn't always have to be confrontational. There was a heap of manure arriving at Grange Garment today. Manus figured it had to be good to make gardens, and he supposed it would be a fitting way to pass out. Or he could simply have stayed in bed. Surely that would be his preferred exit scene. There was actually a woman in his bed, Vera, fit and healthy too, but didn't get on well. Just this morning they had fought. He hadn't been able to tell her exactly which corner he would be on or what time he would be back. She was petulant and he got angry with her, then angry at himself for getting angry. It was just a sort of waste of time and energy that he had been determined to avoid with her. It seemed a basic part of her everyday life. It would be part of his if they were together. He couldn't waste his life like that. He was going to have to finish with her. Life would be clearer without such complications. Clearer, simpler, less complicated, yeah. He hadn't even got attached. Well, no, that wasn't quite true. He hadn't been attached, but she could be very loving towards him. And what kind of a fool threw away loving without thought? In fact, what kind of a fool was he to even think of it? Who the hell else was ever again going to come over and do for him what she did? The woman enriched his life. He was so much poorer on his own. Even the option to reject her enriched him. His mind and emotions contradicted themselves constantly. Clarity on the subject evaded him. He tried to focus on the job in hand. His chest hurt as he struggled up the hill. His heart pounded. It was an effort to force a half a breath full of air into his lungs. He abandoned using his nostrils and gulped at the air through his mouth. When he did manage to get a full breath, he was gratefully aware of it as a precious blessing. His nature was such that it seldom valued water till the well ran dry, or relationships till they were over, or his breath till he was on his last. The last few weeks of protest had been cold, hard days. Sierra had some private security firm, Guard X, following the protesters home. Their chief man was English, went around with his hood up and a cine camera on most of the time. Someone said he was an ex-British soldier. I just wondered if he was and if he had served up north. The Guard X threatened protesters when they got them on their own. You don't know who you're dealing with. 2 weeks of having their little white vans following you home. 2 weeks of standing down lorries and being overwhelmed by the numbers of Sierra workers and their security force took its toll on the protesters. Manus was tired trudging up the hill. Tired and weary of the inevitable confrontation he was rushing towards. He hoped to stay focused throughout the confrontation. But just as he had become embroiled in some personal domestic squabble with Vera, so he knew he was likely to become involved in something even stupider and more unpleasant with the Sierra workers. Still, he would try his best. What else could you do? He hoped some other protesters would be there at the corner, some support, that he wouldn't just be standing on his own. He got to the corner. There was no other protesters, no support. He was just stood on his own. He'd come out to stand beside other people. He was no one-man crusader. Up until today, he had never had to stand alone. He phoned for help. Joanna was on her way with Graham and Jamesy. They were just getting ready and then walking up to the McGrain's Garment squats. It would be less than a 10-minute walk for them. How long would it take them to get ready? Meanwhile, Manus was stood at the corner on his own. His stomach churned. He didn't want to be doing this on his own. And what could he do on his own? There was two unprotected corners. What was he supposed to do? Run between them? And here came a Sierra lorry. Manus got across the North Circular and stopped it before it got a chance to turn in. The driver looked pissed. The big truck could have just run him over, an insignificant lone figure. The driver looked like he would have if he could have got away with it. This was still the wealthy West, where the citizens still enjoyed the right to protest, and the driver was forced to drive on down the North Circular Road, and Manus got to walk back to the corner pavement. But on his own, it was futile. He phoned Sean, one of the men he had stood with over the weeks. Is there any spare bodies, Sean? I'm stood here on my own. But Sean said they were swamped with workers' trucks in Stony Batter and couldn't see how they could spare anybody. Two trucks drove into the next corner, and with a shake of his head and a shrug of his shoulders, Manus trotted off to do what he could. Manus knew the drivers. He had been battling with both of them before. One was Polish, the other from Donegal. The Donegal man's swaggering arrogance, along with his contempt for the protesters, had annoyed Manus. Manus had let his tyres down. A childish prank. The Donegal man had to pump his tyres back up at the end of his day's work. He now had a personal vendetta with Manus. Manus smiled his welcome when he approached Donegal. "Och, sweetheart, could you not keep away from me?" Donegal scowled back. But Donegal was a human being. Manus could see that. It almost came into the man's head to smile back, but no. Best to stick to what you knew. Donegal knew scowling best. There was a small digger on the back of Donegal's trailer, and he let the ramp down to drive it off. Manus jumped onto the back of the trailer to stop the digger being driven anywhere. "You're trespassing my private property," Donegal said. Manus smiled and nodded. Donegal fumed a bit. Manus had his phone out. He pointed at Donegal, making out that he was making a video of anything that happened. Manus wasn't over familiar with the phone and kept accidentally flipping it into selfie mode. Fortunately for Manus, Donegal didn't know about Manus's ineptitude on the phone, and he did know about not being caught using violence on phone cameras, so he just fumed. Then he put the ramp back up and made the drive off. Manus jumped off the trailer as it drove away. Donegal stopped the truck and Manus jumped back on. Then Donegal started driving away again and Manus jumped off. They played this little game a few times. Then the lorry was stopped and Manus was stood on the trailer facing the digger, trying to get through to some help on the phone, when Donegal came behind him and got his arm around Manus's neck and pulled him back. Caught between the digger and the ramp, Manus had no room to manoeuvre or defend himself. His spine was up against the ramp. It hurt. Donegal was spluttering something in his ear. There was an intimacy in the spluttering threats. "I'll break your fucking spine, you scummy little shit." Spines are serious things. Manus wondered if his was going to be nicked here, permanently damaged. He knew people it had happened to, forever in a wheelchair. It would probably be good for the anti-watermeter cause. On a personal level, it probably wouldn't mean much to a man from Donegal. But it wouldn't just be a personal matter, it would be a legal matter. One of the problems in the wealthy West. People still had the legal right to protest. Permanently damaging their spines would have legal consequences. Joanna, Graham and Jamesy arrived. Donegal released his grip and Manus was able to stand. He rolled his shoulders, stretched his neck. Manus seemed unshaken and unmoved by the encounter. With 2 workers and 4 protesters, the game should have been over. Most workers give up when you stand in front of them. They can't get any work done and they know it. But Donegal and Polish were of a different kind. They had either taken it upon themselves or had been delegated trailblazers. They weren't going to let no pesky natives get in their way. Polish tried putting out the barriers and Donegal tried to drag a Kango over. The protesters stood in their way. The workers tried shouldering their way through. The protesters shouldered back. A car stopped. "You have just assaulted that man," the driver was shouting at Donegal. Manus thanked the driver and asked if he would stand witness in court. But by then, Graham and Jamesy had both murdered any assault under them, and the driver was shouting, "Now you're not doing your cause any good." There was cars behind the driver, and pressure on him to move on, which he did. Sean arrived. 5 protesters, 2 workers. Police phoned for help. Manus asked Graham if there was anyone else in any of the squads that might come out and help. Graham said he didn't know, that most of the other squatters weren't even talking to him. Manus knew there'd been squabbling between the houses. He shook his head. Why the hell were the alternatives ever going to get anywhere when they wouldn't even talk to each other? He personally hadn't been involved in any of the bickerings and ran off to see if he couldn't muster some support. Molly came to the window when he banged on it, looking like, "What the hell is this man banging on my window for?" It was only about 7:30 a.m. "We need help stopping the meters going in," Manus shouted. A couple of them had come out from her house the day before and stood for a couple of hours on the corner of the street to block the lorries. But nothing much had happened, and it had been cold and boring, and a concerted, sustained resistance wasn't a familiar concept. What could you do? People had lives to live and priorities to make. Manus called into his home before he could go back up the hill. Vera had vacated the house. He vacated his bowels, something he hadn't managed in his rush to get out the door earlier. He had to take time out for the basics. He felt a bit better walking up the hill. When he got there, the guards had arrived. 2 guards, 2 workers, 4 protesters stood in front of the workers. Manus nodded a hello to the guards. One nodded back. The other restrained himself. "Oh well, I guess we all have a job to do." Manus grinned and nodded at the assemblage. Then in a louder voice he spoke to Donegal in Polish. "Now come on, yous. Did you not hear the people? There was thousands of us on the streets. We don't want your meters, so pack up and go home." There was pushing and shouldering and standing firm. Manus got pushed back, so he landed hard on his ass. Graham started shouting that Manus had been pushed and that was assault. The guard said Manus had fallen. There was a bit of a standoff for a while when one of the foremen and some guard X arrived. The cops talked to the guard X and the foreman, but when Manus approached asking for information, the cops quickly got back in their car. Manus stood with the protesters. Joanna went and spoke to one of the guard X and came back and said, "I've just been talking to your man there in the white van and he says it's all right, they're just going to pack up and go somewhere else." "I can't believe a word that fuck says," Manus said, exasperated a little. Manus had heard the same man tell the same lie before. "Well, I don't know, do I?" Joanna turned on Manus. "This is just my second day out. We only came to support you." Wordlessly he pleaded, "Ah, no, Joe. I know you're cold and tired and haven't had your breakfast and haven't even had the chance to toilet properly, but don't be turning on me. We need to stand together now." He could see it registering in her brain. He could see the struggle taking place between the desire to lash out and the need to channel it right. Graham got in between them. "Easy, Joe. It's not on Manus. We're out for ourselves." And for a moment it looked like Joe's wrath was going to pour out over Graham. Luckily, one of the Polish workers walking by made some snidey comment as he nodded at Joe, and she turned and ran at him. "Don't you underestimate an Irish woman, you ignorant prick!" She's screaming in his face, arms and hands out, claws out. Polish was back in his truck, hoot sweet. Doors and windows locked. That was the way, Joe. Turn it on them. Vera turned up with coffee and a flask. Manus was pleased to see anybody at resistance action. He put his fist in the air to salute her arrival and she beamed at him. Not totally aware of the situation, she beamed a little in reaction to the hellos and smiles from the Guard X and Sierra workers too. "Oh, V, you daft bism." Manus shook his head. V stood with the protesters, and since there was nothing much else happening, she started to juggle with some juggling balls she had brought. Seemed like as good a plan as any. After some time, the superintendent turned up. Manus went over to him with his phone out and camera on. He hoped it didn't switch back to selfie mode. On this occasion, it didn't. Get away from here and put that camera away, said Superintendent. Sounds to Malice like maybe the superintendent thought that he was talking to one of his children. We have a right to be here and a right to film what happens, Malice said. The superintendent didn't like Malice's tone, a challenge to his authority. James, he was challenging the superintendent at the same time. We have a right. Sorry, said Superintendent indignantly. Not the way you're behaving. We had done nothing wrong, and you're telling me to put away my camera? Why is that, sir? The insolence in Malice's tone, the lack of respect for authority and uniform was too much for Superintendent. He considered himself a patient man, but sometimes the ordinary population just got above itself. Incensed, Superintendent made a grab for Malice's phone. Surprised by the bluntness of the attack, Malice withdrew his arm. Superintendent and another cop grabbed him, forced him back, forced him forward, forced him down, forced him up. Malice was a rag doll. He managed to throw his phone and Sean caught it and ran. Malice's hands were handcuffed behind his back and then a notch or two tighter. They manhandled him into a car. So Malice sat in the back seat of a cop car again. It hadn't happened in decades, but along with the utter powerlessness, the phrase, feels like you've never been away, came to his mind. He tried slipping his cuffed wrists down over his ass to get his legs through and at least have his hands in front of him. But there was little room to move in the back seat of the car, and the truth is, he wasn't as supple as he once was. When the superintendent sat in the front, Malice said, "You lost it." It was straight talking, man to man, no bullshit. The superintendent knew Malice was right. He didn't say anything. "These cuffs are way too tight. There's no need for this," Malice followed on. "It's not far to the station. We'll have them off in a moment." "Try not to struggle or it'll make them worse," said the driver. Was his voice conciliatory? "Cheers, man," said Malice. Superintendent got Malice's name and address and then tried to make some case for his actions. "You had no right to film me." "Sorry," said Malice. "I thought I did." "I thought you were going to hit me with the phone." Malice made a wry face and said sorry again and shook his head. Even the super must have realised how non-credible his excuse sounded. He started ranting a bit. "I don't approve of violence. I've never even raised my baton. I'm a peaceful man." Malice felt inclined to contradict Superintendent, but he wasn't sure how it was all going to play out. If Superintendent felt forced to maintain his right to assault and abduct Malice the way he had, then Malice could end up getting charged with assault. Malice didn't have too much faith in the judicial system protecting the rights of protesters against the rights of the corporations, their defenders, or their representatives. Besides, it wasn't protecting the minority rich from the poor majority, close to the core of what the laws were really about. And isn't that just what Malice and the other protesters are trying to do? Rob the rich people's resources. Malice wasn't sure why the super was even bothering to try legitimising his assault. But Malice knew enough to let him rant, blow off a little steam, and when he was finished, Malice stated, "My name is Malice McMalice." "Oh, we know your name all right," put in Superintendent. "Good," continued Malice. "Know my name. My name's Malice McMalice, and if there's any cameras there today, you'll see who's a peaceful man." Super wasn't as confident and easy about it all as he should be. Cameras. Everybody had cameras these days. Super went on as they drove. "I have nothing against you protesting. There was thousands of you out protesting the weekend and no problems." Thousands out protesting and the watermeters are still going on today, Malice wanted to point out, but restrained himself. He let the super go on. "The protesters didn't have the right to block O'Connell Bridge the way they did. Now that was wrong," said Super. It was a bit strange for Malice, the guard trying to give his point of view. Malice liked to think that the man inside the uniform was still human, who knew that ragging someone around the street for pointing a camera at you was wrong. It's a sad fact, though, that people put uniforms on to separate themselves from their humanity. The superintendent said things like, "I don't hate you." Malice says, "I don't hate you. This is just a situation." The superintendent had white hair. He had to be around the same age as Malice. His mortgage would be paid and his children grown with kids on their own. A different type of life than the one lived by Malice. By the time they got to Mountjoy, the superintendent was saying that Malice was not going to be charged with anything. That bringing him to the station would be no more than a formality. They would just run his name through the computer, and if he had no warrants on him, he would be free to go. The Garda car drove in through the heavy wooden gates at the back of Mountjoy Barracks. Malice's cuffs were taken off. In the secluded security of Mountjoy Garda Barracks, the superintendent sent the driver into the building ahead of them while he stalled about the yard for a private word with Malice, human to human. Malice could never remember a cop really wanting to talk to him. In the north, Malice had been slapped around a few times, and on one occasion taken a severe, prolonged beating from cops. And the idea of a uniform seeking his approval or good opinion seemed a strange one. Looking at Malice's ID photo, Super laughed that Malice had changed his hairstyle since the photo was taken. The photo showed him clean shaven and short haired. He now had longish hair and sideburns. I get work as an extra. I like hairy faces and long hair, Malice explained in good-humoured camaraderie. The sun was shining in the empty yard and the two stood in silence. I suppose you'll say I'm a terrible bollocks as soon as you get out of here, said Super. Malice shrugged. He was in no position to talk straight with the man. He wondered if he was really going to be allowed to walk straight out. You've been reasonable with me, he lied. Super had to put his head down and smile a bit at that. He was not a stupid man. I knew the word reasonable could not be applied to his behaviour that morning. With the naivety of a child, Malice was ever keen to believe in the basic decency of human beings and liked to think that all the superintendent's conscience wasn't solely prompted by his fears of the camera. In any event, Malice was not Captain Mountjoy. In front of his men, the superintendent stuck his hand out to Malice. You're free to go, he said. Malice stuck his own hand out. Does this mean I'm allowed to take pictures on the street? He asked as they shook hands. There was an awkward silence then, and Malice moved through it to the door.